All right. And everything is going well. It's October 18th and it's amazingly fall, beautiful weather, 79 degrees in Austin, Texas, all the way to Central Valley. Beautiful, beautiful. We have a great guest today. Before we get going, we're going to ask our own John Sibley Butler to play some music, and hopefully Llewellyn will come back.
In the November morning chill, when the village is quiet and still, I took a walk through the fallen leaves to the fishery, where my old friend Pagliacci had coffee for me. Over the cobblestones of the town, kicking apples that were strewn on the ground, I could hear the sound of the surf and the cry of the seagull. Moreover, I checked at the edge of the wall.
All right. Well, John Butler, how is it going? What's going on? I want to talk smart mobility, but tell me what's happening in the world.
Everything is moving in the world. I don't know if it's smart. I can tell you that. From the Senate and the Congress, who's going to be the leadership, and right there, right in the middle of everything, we have the Israeli conflict. We have a president, I think, for the first time in a war zone in the history of America. So I found that completely interesting. And of course, we have what's going on in Ukraine. So it looks like that the world is a mess. It looks like that Washington, D.C. is a mess in terms of developing who the leadership would be. And I'm not sure if I like a president of the United States in a war zone. So I think that's where we are now, and that's what's coming to me from the television. Otherwise, the life is pretty wild. The startup stuff is just off of the chart. I've spent the last, 3 days and 2 days last week just on startups themselves. Lots of them have to do with energy. And if you look at the mobility, of course, the state of Texas is trying to put charges all along the interstate. That's going on. And then we just got another X million for the economy and for what entrepreneurs to do in the mobility area. So the mobility area is very, very strong. The startup area there is very, very strong. And other than that, we've got the issue. Some people are saying that jobs will disappear because of AI. Other people are saying that it will enhance the ability to create jobs. Some teachers are using AI to teach with. Other teachers fear AI, especially in colleges and university. And then, of course, you have the whole deal about the economy and what's going on with the economy. And I think the economy itself is doing pretty good, but we've got all of this what ifs, if this happens and when will the stock market go south and etc. But on the other hand, kids are still going to school. Kids are still finishing high school. They're still finishing elementary school. Football games are still going on. And there's enormity within all of this chaos. That's kind of what's going on. We certainly cannot control what happens around the world, but the question is, can we manage it? And,
right.
And I think there's war, and then there's just evil. And as a Vietnam veteran myself, I know the difference between fighting a war and the evil that happens in war. So it's been very, very interesting, and it's a lot to do, lots of creativity going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Llewellyn King, how are you, sir?
Well, I'm fine. I'm not as optimistic about things as John is. I think we could see a major conflagration in the Middle East very easily. It is very, very precarious. We haven't resolved anything to do with Ukraine, which is the interesting thing is, will we divert war material from Ukraine? that they're anticipating and send it to Israel if they are on munitions, for example. And we don't know what that will do to the price of oil, and for that matter, to the supply and to the global market of natural gas. I'm looking at the role of Qatar here, one of the largest gas producers, which has been very friendly to Gaza. And I'm saying this carefully, to Gaza. They spent $14 billion helping rebuild and make Gaza somewhat more livable. It's a true hellhole. Because there are too many people in too small an area. If they feel that they have to stand with Hamas in the present situation, we may see perturbations in the global market, something like we saw with the oil embargo in '73. We don't know. Price of oil is bound to go up, and every time there's trouble in the Middle East, there's a panic buying. I think the great challenge to the U.S. is to dissuade Israel from excessive vengeance. Vengeance is a concept well understood in the Middle East, but also elsewhere. I mean, we were so angry as a people after 9/11. We invaded Iraq, Afghanistan. And in hindsight, that probably wasn't the smartest thing. There was, maybe you could say, a vengeance invasion. People feel they want to see something done. They want to see the guilty parties punished. Meanwhile, the on-the-ground suffering in Israel is terrible. We will, in Gaza and in Israel, 1,400 Israelis were killed. It is an awful mess, and it shouldn't be underestimated, its impact on the world. I'm fond of the saying, what Leon Trotsky said, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. I would say you may not be interested in the Middle East, but the Middle East is interested in you. Meanwhile, domestically, we have a totally dysfunctional House of Representatives, and primarily because of dysfunction in the Republican Party. They do not seem to be able to find a leader, having toppled the one they had. And that is a very bad situation at a time when we may need international expeditious decisions. Certainly what we do not need is for the government to close down at the end of the month or whenever that is scheduled to happen if we continue on the present trajectory. A tough situation, all right. AI has arrived. We only really took notice of it this year because of ChatGPT. But if you read Axios today, the fast food restaurants are going to AI big time. That, to me, is the first large subtraction of jobs, entry-level jobs, but nonetheless jobs. And we'll see it elsewhere. Johnny is right. It is a mixed picture in education. Journalism, it's a very mixed picture. We have in India, we have bots reading the news and then turning to a human being to discuss it, which is, to me, quite terrifying. That is happening. Exponential growth in AI is inevitable. After a while, the benefits may become clear and visible. They are not at present. They're likely to be in research. Medicine in particular will get a huge boost. And probably things like our guests' endeavors in automated automobiles. We shall see.
Yeah, absolutely. Good roundup there. So Kevin Beaty, how are you, sir? Welcome to the RoundTable.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm doing well.
Yeah.
Although I wonder if I should or could be doing well after those highlights that Mr. Butler and Mr. King just shared.
Well, I'm the ultimate optimist in any playing field. So I think things are fabulous. gotta have salt and pepper together to make it interesting. So gotta have some challenges to solve. But I'm curious, you move into space as principal at Yunev and worked all your life in the automotive world. Curious what your thoughts are on how all this is being fell through in the journey of the automotive transformation that is happening with connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, transportation of all kinds. What can you share?
Well, I'll probably keep my comments more on the commercial vehicle side where I've spent most of my career, Andreas. But there's a lot happening, of course, in the passenger car, light truck, SUV space around electrification that has a lot of ripples into the truck and bus and what we call the long tail of e-mobility, the smaller industrial off-highway construction, ag, marine, ports, trucks, buses, where the volumes just aren't even close to what you see with the global passenger car automakers. And so those OEMs and their fleet customers, of course, have a keen interest in going electric, as you say, integrating smart technology around higher levels of safety, security, productivity, ergonomics, connectivity. But, the numbers, the volumes of units that they're producing are much smaller. And their engineering teams and their sourcing teams are a bit smaller. So it's a little more challenging. They've got to be a little more selective about what they bite off on. So just in terms of framing, my perspective, it really is more that longer tail, lower volume. But, we have a weekly news report. I know, Andres, you get it. I don't know if you read it, but, we spend a lot of time going through all of the EV articles worldwide and then narrowing that down to kind of some of the top news that affect folks in our segment in that lower volume. But often those stories are about the passenger car and the major battery makers because the investments they're making have direct impact on even the smaller customers. So sure. I'll just say that as a kind of a front-loading disclaimer.
Kevin, let me just ask a question. I kind of try to keep up with the indexes. They have indexes that shows why people will not purchase things in terms of the automobile industry. I have not really did the analysis when you break out the commercial. But when you look at and read about a lot of stuff, on the commercial side, on the consumer side, they talk about how expensive it is. And an EV might be twice as expensive as a regular mode of transportation. And then they talk about the charging stations. People are afraid they'll get stuck in Lukenbach, Texas somewhere. And then, of course, they talk about the range. And then there's also a mixture of research which shows, on one hand, in the laboratory, the ranges are increasing, right? On the other hand, the people are having experiences. Being a Southern Louisiana boy, we're familiar with a lot of water. And then, of course, what happens when the battery get wet. What do you say that the biggest challenge for the EVs in difficult times, not sunny days, rain, storms, what would be the biggest challenge when things are not right, when the golf course is not right, when it's raining, when it's pouring, when it's storming, and then floods? What's your biggest challenge? Because that's what I hear. And I think the expensive part would just go down as the number of cars increase.
Yeah, the submersion of a battery is not a desirable event. I mean, that is just at face value, that's a problem. So if we take that out, high water crossings, you probably shouldn't be in that high water crossing anyway in your vehicle. Better off just to stay back and wait and let the water recede. Or if it's that bad, stay home or join the emergency responders and get a diesel going. But I think typically the cost is, as you say, 2.5 the normal price. So even when you're facing much lower operating costs, much lower even life cycle costs. You've got to come up with 2.5x the capital up front. And, you know, money's not getting cheaper. So does that mean you buy half as many vehicles because you've got capital constraints, or do you just go out and spend twice the capital to get the same number of vehicles? And then you're going to make it up over 10 years. A lot of people don't have a 10-year timeline to recover that capital, a lot of companies. So, you know, the cost, it's a big factor. I don't see it going away in the next 5, 6, 7 years in terms of the relative cost. There are, you know, solid gains being made on battery price, but also quite a bit of volatility as the demand and the supply get out of alignment. The range issue you talk about is real. So in the winter, you know, if you're spending a lot of energy heating that cab, that's got to come from somewhere. Used to it came from the fuel tank, and you had plenty of excess range. You didn't have to worry about it. Well, with the battery, you were already sort of just acceptable. And now when you pull half the battery down to heat or cool the cab during extreme environmental conditions, and I don't mean catastrophes, I just mean summer in Phoenix or winter in Minneapolis, you're now having a real impact on your operability, that's for sure. But there's a lot of work going on for micro cooling solutions. So cooling and heating the driver rather than the entire volume of the cab, just keeping that driver cool and comfortable, whether it's heat or cooling, much more efficient. Those technologies are being developed in parallel. I mean, I think you were trying to kind of sketch out where is this technology going to kind of fail in the real world, right?
Yeah, right. In other words, what's the outside of the normal? Because you know, with any automobile, you need to know that, right? Or anything, because in some parts of the country. And I'll just say this, Kevin, I think I see a hybrid kind of solution coming. So people have talked about, okay, I need a petrol for long distance, but I need a runabout. I need a golf cart to run about town in.
Sure.
You know, but the question is, who would be able to afford the 2 petrol cars plus the runabout? And they will come in all sizes. They won't all be big luxury, you know, BMWs. They'll come in all sizes. But I do find it interesting. And I'm talking from discussions, because I live in a neighborhood where there are lots of electric vehicles, lots of Teslas here in Austin. And, you know, and they talk about moving around, but they don't talk about driving to Houston. They don't talk about driving to New Orleans. It's sort of you know, it might be a hybrid kind of deal.
Yeah, so I think there is quite a bit of talk, John, in the commercial vehicle space. I say quite a bit. I hear talk about hybrid maybe making a resurgence. We had hybrid in production 20 years ago in this industry. It started receding about 10 years ago, and really has not been in fashion for the last 8 or 9 years. But I could definitely see hybrid coming back for many of the reasons you're citing. One of the problems with that, though, could be on the policy side. You know, California's passed the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, which helps really send a strong signal to the industry that we're headed for a zero carbon future, a zero emissions future, and, you know, any forms of carbon in the vehicle are just not acceptable. So most of the hybrid solutions would have a blend of each. You know, Europe's working on some of the synthetic e-diesel systems, which could be interesting if they get traction there. Would they find a home here from a policy perspective? Not sure. I think the sustainable hybrid solution is basically a hydrogen fuel cell with battery electric storage. And then you could size the fuel cell and the hydrogen storage to meet the driving routes where a battery electric's just not, you know, sufficient to get the mission satisfied. So
real quick, let me jump on that to help you expand something. It seems though that people they want this to happen for all the right reasons, get rid of carbon, do not understand the world that you live in, meaning most of things that we consume are delivered by trucks, and everything that is a work yard, a motor, a lot of this stuff is running diesel. And so getting rid of diesel, is it possible to get rid of diesel? That's the question.
Well, something to add, Gary, if I might.
Yeah.
I have just written an article on what Burns and McDonnell, the architect construction firm, is doing. It is preparing for, and this is why what Kevin said about the long tail is a special interest. It is planning and installing essentially the infrastructure around intra-city electric trucks. And they predict that half of the truck fleets in the country will go electric by 2035. Intra-city, not intercity, not long distances, short distances. And the technology is to use a pantograph to recharge, and possibly along the route to have a pantograph, so that you can get a little boost if you need it. This would work very well, of course, for buses, which you would see the return of essentially the trolley bus. But the numbers, they have numbers that blew me away. There's an article in Forbes, on Forbes.com, which actually I wrote, on this subject, this huge rush to electrify in-city fleets. And everybody's into it. The post office, Amazon, etc. All of the delivery companies are into it. So there is a revolution, a quiet revolution taking place in that part of the electric world, where you can control the route, you can control the time of charge, and where you can therefore mitigate the climate effects by more charging or not using the vehicle that day. So that's very interesting to me. The thing which is of concern, will we have the electricity to charge all these vehicles? I was on the television just yesterday doing a program for the United States Energy Association on small modular reactors, but one of the participants said that AI is going to quadruple the amount of power compared to what today's server farm uses. That's a huge amount of power. We are putting more and more demand on the electric system, and we are not keeping up by adding a generation or even transmission to get the electricity from where it is or where it might be or where the resource is. For example, solar and wind in the west to the east where the consumption is. So all of these things are part of a very complex matrix, which may or may not work out. But the immediate surge in electrification, which I see, will actually be commercial, but not intercity. I think Kevin's absolutely right. If it's going to be intercity, it may be a hydrogen fuel cell, or for a very long time, diesel. I would just add, in my research, I find that Toyota is working on a revolutionary concept in the hybrid. Toyota was out front with the Prius. They've always been out front. Now they're looking for a sort of hybrid with not so much an alternative engine, but an auxiliary engine, which would take care of a lot of these things like heating, cooling, and in a necessity, charging, but not an integral part of the daily operation of the hybrid vehicle.
Interesting.
Yeah, I like the term range extender for some of those hybrid architectures, Llewellyn, where, yeah, the engine's not really a core part of the propulsion as much as it is really just extending the battery range by storing some fuel in a much more dense.
It's sort of like having a tank of gas in the trunk. When you're on a long trip, I grew up in Africa, and you always had gasoline in the trunk because you never knew when you would get to a gas station, which might be several hundred miles away, or whether it would have any gas when you got there.
That's right.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me to my next question. You got states like California passing laws about zero carbon future. So does that mean then that there will be no standardization over states? So if I live in California and if I live in Texas and I drive a petrol to a gasoline car to California, do I get fined? You know, we took a long time, as you know better than me, in standardizing everything from red lights to stop signs to gas stations with the interstate. So this is why when you get off of an interstate, it all looks alike. There's a truck stop over here, and there's where you can eat over here, and there's a gas station. What does that mean for the standardization process of America? If California has to be zero carbon future in the future, that is, with any type of vehicle, what does it mean for standardization in the automobile industry?
Yeah, I think that those are good examples of policy challenges as we move out on this journey, the policy and standard support that are going to be needed. When I look at China's track record for setting standards and policies, they send very clear signals, and the industry can respond in a way that's just mind-boggling to us here because there's a great deal of certainty and clarity. Even if we get that with an administration, we're only 4 minus X years away from the next election cycle, and the momentum or the policies or the clarity could be either reversed or shifted pretty dramatically. So it's a much more complex operating environment for business leaders, and even at the state level, to try and coordinate.
I'd like to throw in here that, of course, the California law was passed by people in the legislature, and they can repeal it. What we have seen in the past, excuse me, I'm sorry, when there's a national emergency, things change. The Alaska gas pipeline was an example of that, the oil pipeline rather. It became preemptive, and all of the NIMBY considerations were brushed aside because we needed the oil in the South, and it came through remarkably well, and nobody's bitched about it since then or tried to close it down on the grounds that it shouldn't have been done that way. So you can always see preemptive federal legislation in an emergency. Now that doesn't, and Kevin, I take your point very well, that doesn't help businesses to plan. It doesn't allow you to look to the future and know where you should put your resources, both in terms of talent and money. It's very difficult. And the way from here to 2050 and allegedly to zero carbon is littered with impossible obstacles out of the way. We are not going to get double the production of electricity and maybe triple it by 2050 unless we get some of these obstacles out of the way. It simply cannot happen. If you cannot improve transmission, siting, and that whole slew of issues that is making it impossible for us to expand electric production or even to take full advantage of the resources available, something will have to be done. And my own guess, and it's only a guess, is that sometime around about 2035, 2040, there'll be a slew of new thinking, new legislation, and critical paths towards solving some of these issues.
So Llewellyn, you're saying that the Biden administration, I think, has by 2027 that all lightweight vehicles will be electrified, right? And then by 2035 to make all federal vehicles electrified. So you're saying that that's just a hypothesis. It could change with the next administration.
That's not going to change, not in what I was talking about in the intra-city market, because the companies want it. It's cheaper to run electric prime delivery than it is to run diesel prime delivery. The numbers are very appealing. And the companies are headed in that direction, whether it's United Parcels or Amazon Prime, whatever. That is going to happen. There's huge economic muscle behind that conversion. When you come to civilian transportation, it's much more optional. There is really, California is the exception. We're going to have much more charging, much more range on the vehicles to convert the entire fleet or even half the US fleet to electricity. But when it comes to commercial vehicles, in-city commercial vehicles, which is quite substantial, and I'd throw in school buses into that mix, you're going to see a sudden and dramatic ramping up of demand, which will stress the supply chain, as it always does nowadays that we're used to constrained supply, and we will have pressure on precious metals, cobalt, lithium, you know, the whole list. But Kevin, I'd like to ask you, what is your company doing? How is it looking to the future, and what are its expectations for itself?
Well, one of the things we watch very closely is the build out of battery production capacity around the globe, and especially in North America to support IRA, domestic supply requirements. And if you look out through 2030, all of the plants that have been announced with a lot of JVs between the pass car OEMs and the major battery makers, we're currently right around 1.2 trillion or terawatt hours per year. Sorry, terawatt, not trillion. So over, about 1,100 gigawatt hours, if that's your unit that you're familiar with, per year. But the vast majority of that is already allocated for passenger car, light truck, SUV production. So the question is still very open around how much of that capacity, or how much capacity that's planned and identifiable, is going to be there to support the migration over for medium and heavy duty trucks.
Does that number, Kevin, does that number give you the number of units of vehicles? The US produces roughly 18 million vehicles a year, brand new.
Yeah, you can do the math. On the passenger car side, I haven't done it lately, but I could just do it real quick.
I mean, do we have enough production supply chain to produce?
That's like 50.
18 million electric vehicles.
Yeah, that gets you in the ballpark, 15 million, I think,
Okay.
out at the end of the decade.
Yeah. So quick question for you, because I'm really interested. You're tracking things globally, but I'm curious locally in the corridor. GM has a plant in Dallas. Toyota has a plant in San Antonio, Austin. Tesla is in Austin. All those companies are, bringing supply chain to Texas. There are, companies like, Simwang or Plasticon, or, you got the autonomous guys, Waymo, Cruise. You got things like Aero and Round Rock. Can you talk a little bit about, all the companies that are coming on, Continental, Navistar, what's going on with the ecosystem? Who's moving in here? What does that look like? What does that look like in terms of jobs?
Yeah, locally, I'm not as good a data point, honestly, Andreas. So anecdotally, some of those companies, I talk to them, like startups offshore who have announced their headquarters here. They actually have space leased here, like 40, 50,000, maybe 100,000 square feet with their signs up. There's no headcount in Austin yet. So they're planning to come, but they're waiting until they have enough orders to, really ship equipment in to fill up those footprints and start staffing. So I think some of them see this area as being attractive from a talent and a business climate perspective, and possibly even along I-10 east-west, serving the US. But most of my information is a bit anecdotal. I'm sorry. You know, the chamber, I would send you to the chamber, other local folks who are really working that all day, every day.
Well, let me ask you this.
I'd like to inject what we might call a factoid
Okay.
here, and that is markets work.
Pardon?
Steady demand, i.e. money chasing something, you get more of it. If the market doesn't work because the resource cannot increase its supply, either because of a depleted base, like in a mineral, then you just do without. You either invent something else or you do without. I think one of the least celebrated and most interesting things in our industrial history was how, when we began to run out of natural rubber, we created synthetic rubber. You've always got to remember that the answer is not necessarily the few things in front of you. It is something else which will come into play. During the energy crisis, when we were prepared to do the most amazing things and damage ourselves enormously in the course, I brought to speak at a conference I had organized Norman McRae. He was then the very distinguished deputy editor of The Economist magazine. And he said, in his particularly way of speaking, well, you know, Llewellyn has brought me here. I don't know why. Energy crisis, the price will go up, the supply will increase. Poof, no crisis. Exactly what happened, and exactly what will happen. So when I hear these sort of supply constraints, give it time and feed it money, and it will change.
You know, well, the current example, like this week, literally is lithium. If you think back 24 months ago, we were all like, oh my goodness, we're never going to have enough lithium to support it. And we literally find ourselves today, even though the market's been increasing 50, 60, 70% year on year on battery production, with a surplus situation on lithium. And we've just discovered, I don't know if you all have followed this news, about a month ago, the largest lithium deposit in the world, more or less validated on the border of Nevada and Oregon. And that's on top of pretty substantial reserves that are being better and better understood. Southeast Arkansas, in the Lithium Valley area in Southern California, quite a bit throughout Canada. So, and to your point, if you can't find it in the ground, maybe you can engineer it in the lab. So, yeah.
Exactly.
I remember the beginning of COVID, all the forecasts on how this was going to play out. And someone shared I thought, a brilliant piece of research around, during all these crises, the forecasts are always so much worse than the reality turns. And they had done this detailed analysis of over the last several hundred years when these crises emerged and all the experts were prognosticating on how bad it was going to be. The reality rarely is worst case.
Really, and you're so right. Excuse me. I remember in 1974, when the situation, I did a study for President Nixon, and supplies looked awful. We had coal and coal and coal and nuclear, nothing else. We didn't have a Department of Energy, but I think it was the Energy Administration or whatever it was, said forget natural gas, it's depleted, but of course it wasn't. And the whole thing, I went over and talked to a man called Donald Rice, who became head of, actually became Secretary of the Air Force, among other jobs. Very young man then, an analyst at the Office of Management and Budget, which was, I think it's still called the Bureau of the Budget in those days. And he said, what about oil and gas in the Southern Hemisphere? And I said, well, the conventional wisdom, the oil companies say there is nothing. Now, of course, we have huge reserves in the Southern Hemisphere. We have all off the coast, off the South American coast, we have production. We have production of gas off Australia. We have production of gas off South Africa, places that traditionally were thought not to have any hydrocarbons except coal. So, you've got to expect that there will be solutions and that there are workarounds. And you're so right about lithium. They even have lithium mines in England now. I mean, everybody rushed in. I suspect many of them, because the resource base is fairly small and it's up against huge resource bases like the one in the US or the one in Bolivia. But when I started writing about lithium, there was the lithium triangle in South America. That was it.
Right.
And Bolivia, which wasn't producing and still isn't for political reasons. But it's all changed because people have gone out looking for it because there's money involved.
And eventually, if we get enough vehicles on the road and we can wear them out, we'll have urban mines and just be reclaiming.
Oh, yeah. No, the future is, we just don't know. And straight line projections are inevitably absolutely wrong.
Well, we do know. Let me ask you about the tax credit. I think that all of my people who are driving electric cars, they got a tax credit, right? Will that be extended? Will it go up? What it was, $8,000 or $7,000? I'm not sure. What's the impact of politics and the tax credit? Will it go to 10,000? Will it go to 15,000? Will it remain constant? Because a big incentive to buy the electric car was, I think, the tax credit. Everybody who has it said, well, I got a tax credit of, I can't remember what it was. Yes.
I think 7,500 for pass car has been the number for quite some time, still is to my knowledge. I mean, that helps. Most of your neighbors who have Teslas didn't need the 7,500. So, I mean, it's interesting, but I don't know that it's a real driver. The production tax credit of $45 per kilowatt hour on the batteries is absolutely enormous. And the IRA money and the BPIL money that's been flowing in, if you ask what the impact of that is, it's about $100 billion in North America. That's what's been announced and is literally already inked out for EV charging and battery production in this country. That kind of investment is just unprecedented. And a lot of the folks in the projects that were going to happen in Europe before the US have now landed here sooner because of those policies and some of that funding. There's such a disruptive element to it in terms of doing so much so fast that I personally just kind of wonder how much of that is going, what will be the efficiency of all that deployed capital at the end of the day. But it definitely is shaking things up and moving things forward, that's for sure.
Sure. I have a question, Kevin. When am I going to see a Tesla semi-truck?
Oh, well, Jay Leno tells us there's 70 out there in operation right now. He's got the best market data of any of us after a meeting with Elon or one of Elon's key people just recently. One of the groups that I've worked with closely over the years, North American Council on Freight Efficiency, they've just been doing a run on less program. You may have read about it. It's starting to get a lot of attention in the mainstream press over the last week or two. Tesla delivered with their semi a little, better range than Volvo and Freightliner with their all electric trucks. So PepsiCo is running a number of those in their fleet, as are a number of other fleets. But, we're still in the very early days with, less than 100 of those out on the road. So it's exciting. They're demonstrating the technical feasibility. If you look at someone like a Tesla, you look at their low battery cost because they have such scale on the pass car side, they really are in a position to deliver, I think, a very cost-effective Class 8 truck. For Daimler or for Peterbilt, Kenworth, Navistar, a little bit harder because they just don't have that kind of scale on the battery side.
Right. Tell us about, real quick, Johnny, tell us, Kevin, what's going on with electrification of buses for education, transportation?
Yeah. Well, the bus market's been out ahead of the truck industry on electrification for for the last couple of decades, they went in big on hybridization, then battery electric. Now they're starting to place pretty meaningful orders, especially in Europe, for hydrogen buses. And when I say hydrogen, that includes a pretty substantial battery pack. So it's, there's battery storage on board as well. So the bus folks have been out front. They continue to adopt the technology a little bit faster. The school bus segment is just become a real focal point for California policy, other state policy, and certainly federal funding. So in all of the commercial truck and bus segments, I'd say school bus is one of the real hot spots at the moment. And the supply, the manufacturers are just, they're challenged on the supply side, getting batteries, getting all the key components, and being able to build enough to meet sourcing. I was just in Colorado a couple of weeks ago, or even last week, talking to some folks at NRail. Steamboat had orders for a handful, let's say a half a dozen, and they've been waiting and waiting and waiting. And then finally 3 arrived, and it was a big celebration. And so everybody's excited. I mean, when you have to wait that long for 3 school buses and then you're that excited, it's a real signal that, okay, let's have a reality check here, folks.
So who are the bigger names, or who are the new names in the electric bus?
Bluebird, Bluebird is going all in on electrification. Thomas Built, which is owned by Daimler, is also doing electric buses. You've got Eaton Corp, which is basically Navistar on their bus side. They're doing electric buses. You've got a startup out of Canada called Lion Electric. They are a newer player, not a long established vehicle manufacturer, but they're going big. And then you've got some other startups and folks that are just really trying to get in.
Yeah. What about the robo-taxi market?
Yeah. I mean, those players probably better than I do, Andreas.
You don't see that as a commercial thing?
I do, but I think it's going to, kind of like Llewellyn was saying, it's going to be city centers, it's going to be geofenced, it's going to be really
airport city.
Almost like I call it. I've called this, even in China, for our hybrid buses we deployed 20 years ago. I just call it the moving sidewalk. If you went to Guangzhou 20 years ago, the buses are basically lined up on the sidewalk. Their doors are open just long enough for 200 people or 100 people to get on board, and then they roll down to the next stop at 15 miles an hour. I mean, you can walk down the sidewalk and almost keep up with them, okay? And then there's one right behind them, right behind them, right behind them, right behind them, miles long. It's just like a moving sidewalk.
Yeah, that's a very good, I'm so glad you mentioned the moving sidewalk, because that is how bus transportation really works. You don't have to have as many as you saw in China, but the secret on big routes in London is the number of buses. If you miss a number 11, within 1 minute there'll be another number 11, then another number. So it takes all the pressure. It makes it a feasible way to get around. There's several, long time since I lived in London, I think number 15, number 9, and number 11, or basically what became moving sidewalks. I love
it's like taking the company plane to Denver out of Austin. You don't even need a reservation. Just go to the airport, go to Southwest, and there's a plane leaving in about 45 minutes.
Exactly right. Now, Kevin, we've been here before with urban transportation. I'm old enough to remember that when all the buses in New Orleans had electric railroad tracks hooked to them, and they went up in the air and attached to the electricity. And I'm old enough to know that electric cars have been here a long time, and the reason why they were not produced had to do with the developing oil industry and those kind of things. Now, so the fact of the situation, if we dug up Congress Avenue in Austin, Texas, we would find the rails of the electric vehicles that used to be there. remember that the trolleys were electric trolleys, right?
Well, you should go downtown. I think we are digging it up. Yeah.
I think we are good. So I think if we look back, my question is, we've been here before with urban electric. It's nothing new, right? We've been here. And like you say, oh, by the way, every time I fly Southwest Airlines, I'm mad because my name's on the side. Somebody erased my name and put Southwest. That's the company plane. But my point is, hey, we've been here before. So what's the difference now in 1880, 1890?
Well, I think, I mean, you know, the battery technology is
the battery technology.
It's incredible. And the electronics and the miniaturization of some of the working components on the electric drivetrain, the power electronics have both been miniaturized and cost is brought out, and they're much more reliable. I mean, we're on our way to a point of no return, but the transition is not as fast or as painless as some of the headlines would suggest. And so as I've listened to you guys during this call, I just feel like I need to say, you know, we need more engineers, we need more scientists, we need more people tackling all these challenging technical problems. We're not going to be able to get our way out of this through software and the cloud only.
The truth of the matter is, as everybody's been saying, nobody brings their electricity with them. That's the truth of the matter. Truth of the matter is that Andreas can show you statistics to show if everybody had an electric car, what would happen to the electric grid. Truth of the matter is that the grid that we depend upon, that's been so dependable, cannot meet the challenge.
Well, it could meet the challenge. The problem is political constraints.
Right.
You can't build what you need to build because the not in my backyard syndrome.
Right.
Well,
so,
and you can
but it's also the cost. The cost is estimated to build the grid that they want is $11 trillion.
But isn't there a lot of available capacity off peak that's not being used at the moment?
There is, but you've got to move it or store it.
Normal capacity is usually 50 to 60% of peak capacity. Our peak capacity is 1,100 gigawatts as a nation on the electric grid. But if you take 280 million vehicles and move them to electric, and they all had a 100 kilowatt hour battery, that is 28,000 gigawatts. That is 28 times the current capacity of the whole country.
Wait, 1,100 or 11,000 gigawatts?
The total capacity of the US is 1,100 gigawatt production per hour.
Okay.
On peak. And 280 million vehicles nationwide registered converted to electric at 100 kilowatt hours each is 28,000 gigawatts.
But that's isn't that like 20 times more?
28 times more.
Yeah, exactly.
That's an incredible amount of power lines, transmission, distribution, generation infrastructure that doesn't exist. But that's my point, is you've got 24 hours, or maybe you've got 48 or 72 hours over which to charge all those 28. You don't need 28 times, but you need at least 5 or 6 times more, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I don't know. I'd have to do the math, but
so the math has been done by several independent institutes, and the cost of that grid to deliver transportation electrification 100%, it's $11 trillion.
Okay.
So our pessimism is grounded in projections and algorithms.
Have we been, I haven't been following it, but have we been making corresponding investments on the grid as we have a battery capacity and EV production and EV charging, or not so much?
No.
Okay. We have the same grid and the technology sitting on the shelf. Same grid that Andre Cavalli designed. It's what we live off now. And as we like to say, the grid is where computers were 50, 60 years ago, in terms of connectivity, in terms of predicting what will happen. Because it's come a long way, because it's bits and pieces. You can't say that some technologies has not. But then you've got the distributed stuff, at the edge of the grid. And
I would just like to throw in, there are other developments like better connectors, so that you can't go out and rewire the whole country. That would cost even more money. But there are now connectors which will carry twice the power that steel and copper did, and a steel rod just in the center of a copper conduit. So you've got to look at the whole thing. You've got to see what the developments may be collateral. They may be in materials. They may be in, if we ever got perfect resistance free, we would increase the supply of electricity. I'm fascinated by this new cable. Unfortunately, we can't string enough of it in time, but it consists of a carbon fiber rod where you had steel much lighter and an aluminum conductor wound around that in a fancy way, and that is supposed to be able to, and the former head of a utility introduced me to it, so he knows what he's done, an engineer to boot, what he's talking about. They are manufacturing in California. It's supported by the Breakthrough Institute, which is
Bill Gates.
Yeah, Bill Gates, sorry. And so all I'm saying is don't just look at the problem. There are collateral solutions sometimes which are bigger. I've always used as an illustration of this, if you're standing at Kitty Hawk, you're only worried about getting that airplane to fly on a multi-axis. You're not worried about developing high tensile alloys, radio, radar, none of those things, fire departments at airports. You can't worry about everything. You can worry about the central need and then allow the market to solve it. If the market doesn't do it, sometimes you need the government to goose the market, not to take it over, but to goose it. And we've seen a lot of that. We're seeing it now with small modular reactors. We're certainly seeing it with that tax deduction on electric vehicles, which I think should be repealed, because I think it's done its work and not necessary anymore. But you've got to realize that it's never just this hurdle, because there are other ways around it, under it, not necessarily over the hurdle at all. So I think that's just something to bear in mind. It's certainly what I've seen. Every time we've started weeping we can't get from here to there, some development has come and ameliorated the pressure to do it in a certain way. It's sort of like when I was a young man, girls got married very young. The girl said to me once, I don't know if I should marry which of these two guys. I said, darling, it's somebody you haven't met yet. That's clear, because if you're going to try to make them. But the thing is, there are multiple solutions and multidisciplinary approaches to a challenging problem. I just throw that out to keep our minds open.
Well, Andreas, I really want to say thanks again for inviting me to join you guys here in I feel like, what was it? The Hogwarts Library or something there that we keep going? I mean, it's just the setting here.
Well, I like the idea that John Sibley Butler is a Hogwarts. It just appeals to me so much.
Everybody's got to be something. If I'm in, I'm proud of it.
I'm leaving here looking forward to Llewellyn, you said like maybe around 2035 we'd step back and reevaluate. I think it'll be sooner than that. I think we're talking,
well, it may indeed, it may be closer to
later this decade. I think there will be a real reckoning around, okay, which of these policies, which of these investments, which of these technologies, which of these paths are working, which are not. And I think it'll happen in the market. I'm not sure it'll happen in Washington. I do hope we have a Speaker of the House by then, though.
That's up to John Sibley Butler's friends.
Yeah, it is, but we're working on it.
Get it done. All right.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate you very much. Thank you for being with us, Kevin. It's always a pleasure. And it's an interesting and challenging place to be in. Transportation is going to truly change what's going on. I'm excited about the vertical mode of it that is coming as well. And
Yeah.
so we shall discuss more and more transportation as the weeks come. But let's have our own John Sibley Butler take us away.
People say I'm the life of the party because I tell a joke. Loud and hearty, deep inside I'm blue. So take a good look at my face. You see my smile looks out of place. If you look closer, it's easy to trace the tracks of my tears. I need you, I need you.
Woo!
Thank you very much, Kevin. Very informative. I learned a lot.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Likewise.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Luella, for saying that was a great song, John. I knew it was on your mind.
Oh, it was a
Got to say
super
it.
song.
It
I was
was.
going to put in a note of congratulations